Recording in progress. All right, welcome to the May 8th, 2023 regularly scheduled work session. Tonight, there are 2 items on the agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you're required to fill out a public comment card. And if you are speaking on behalf of an organization, you must fill out an affidavit that you have the authority of said organization. Please remember, this is not a time to engage the mayor and members of the city council in conversation. When your name is called, please come forward and speak into the microphone stating your name and address for the record. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Once the item is called, no other public cards will be accepted. Will the city clerk please sound agenda item A?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. That first item is the discussion of updated green policies. It's presented by our Environmental Program Manager, Ms. Emily Groth.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. All right, tonight I'd like to discuss some potential updates to our city's green and sustainable policies that are in line with our Green Communities certification. I'll first review the Green Communities program and go over our first and only policies that first earned our Green Community credit in 2012. Next, I'll go over some proposed updates to create a supplemental policy document to help us earn gold recognition from Green Communities. Tonight's objective is to gather any feedback on these proposed policies and plan for approval of an additional and supplemental resolution on May 15th. So Green Communities, I'm sure you're all familiar, is a program managed by ARC, Atlanta Regional Commission, to encourage Metro Atlanta municipalities to foster sustainability through different projects and awarding a point-based system. And so we have to certify and maintain our certification every 4 years. We started in 2012 with bronze, maintained that in 2016. In 2021, we had our first upgrade to silver. And this year is that 2-year middle mark where we have the opportunity to upgrade again to gold. And we're at a 45-point difference. And if anything else, we are required to maintain our certification at silver by 2025. So some potential projects to work towards gold are these listed here. The ones in brown are to be included in a proposed policy. And that looks like green appliance purchasing policy, green fleet purchasing policy, electric vehicle readiness, and Energy Star certified buildings. So jumping back to 2012, the original green resolution that started this whole thing with Green Communities, it was intended to support that initial application for bronze. And the intent was to establish the Sustainable Practices Program and to establish policies and initiatives in support of that program. The updated green resolution would do just that. The 2012 document included policies related to green buildings, outdoor lighting efficiency, a lights out and power down policy within the office, a no idling policy for city vehicles, and a recycled paper purchasing policy. And those are what exists now under the 2012 resolution. So we're proposing some additional policies to be included in a 2023 green resolution, and it would enhance the existing 2012 resolution, and it would achieve 25 out of 45 points needed for our gold application for Green Communities. So the proposed policies include that green appliance purchasing policy. So that would be purchasing Energy Star rated equipment and appliances, which are pretty commonplace to find, relatively recent. So it would be any new appliance installed at city property or for city facilities would be Energy Star rated. The second one would be a green fleet purchasing policy, and that would be the purchase of the most fuel efficient and most environmentally friendly purchase for administrative city hall fleet. The third one is electric vehicle readiness, and that would just be to identify steps to become prepared for electric vehicle infrastructure citywide. And lastly, the fourth one would be Energy Star certified buildings, which would require that all new city buildings become Energy Star certified or Earthcraft certified. And it's important to note that these policies can carry various exemptions and give way to what fits what best fits the need of the staff or the equipment, while performing due diligence to best align to the spirit of the policy. So for example, Public Works may not need a compact environmental car if they're trying to haul equipment, but this policy just calls for due diligence for the procurement of a new vehicle. So some support for these policies can be found in our strategic plan and comprehensive plans. Our strategic plan calls for an increase in EV charging stations and to improve EPA gas mileage for our city fleet. And the comprehensive plan supports the investment in possible renewable energy sources and possible ordinance for EV infrastructure. So considering this proposed project, next steps would include any feedback tonight and possible adoption of the updated policy resolution on May 15th. And if adopted, we'll use that support to apply for gold at the end of May for green communities. Open to any questions.
Questions for Emily? Paul?
Emily, at the end of the day, achieving the next level for gold, does it accommodate any, for example, if we achieve gold or at our current status, are there different levels of government subsidies available to us for our programs that are differentiated by what level we achieve? Or are there programs available at all? I guess is maybe the first question. And then if so, does it make a difference what level we are to avail ourselves to additional funding?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think generally overall, it can help support further grant applications.
Mhm.
We've used our silver certification for the most recent grant applications that we've had. So I think it helps there. But more specifically, as it relates to Atlanta Regional Commission, I don't think they have additional programs open to green community programs. I think it's just shows good support and high visibility to be used citywide for other initiatives and like federal grant applications.
Yeah, so I think back to an example that you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago, I think from the DS, and that was the investment in the infrastructure to support EVs and what role should the city play compared to the business community. If you've got, a popular area of town that's going to have a high EV usability, but it has nothing to do necessarily with Milton, but it's a parking lot that maybe should have charging stations in it. Should that be our responsibility to put them there, or should it be the business owners that might want to attract people because they can,
Right.
while they're shopping, charge their vehicles? If the not burden, but if in today's environment, the opportunity for us to invest in the clean energy, regenerating, the recharging, one of the things I would have to ensure that we measure is what's the infrastructure cost
Right.
compared to the return. If our just picking numbers out of the air, if our infrastructure cost is going to be $1 million, and there's no way for us to offset that with government programs, or the available programs are only $200,000, what's the, what to measure that against our budget? And are we being fiscally responsible to ensure that we accommodate both, that we continue to be a green friendly community, but that we're also fiscally responsible for our taxpayers? So just more of a comment than a question, I guess.
Yeah, and I think notes like that can be explored in different avenues for infrastructure, like public-private partnership, and different cost options when we're talking specifically infrastructure.
Great. And are we allowed to make those kinds of, declare those kinds of public-private partnerships in our applications to show that kind of partnership is alive and well, and we're fostering it in the community? Is that part of the application process where you can show that kind of partnership, or don't we know yet because it's too new?
Yeah, I think we're still in initial planning phases,
Okay.
but wherever that opportunity arises, I don't think it could hurt.
Great. Thank you.
Emily, what is the cost for us to install an the electric vehicle charging stations?
Off the top of my head, it depends on which level. Level 2 is like the medium-sized ones that you see. That's the ones at the Bethany Bend Coles and the Bethany Publix. And the level 3 are the really giant ones with like its own transformer box.
Uh-huh.
Level 2, I think, can range from $2,000 to $6,000. Level 3 is getting up there. I'm not even confident in the price of a level 3, but I can follow up with you.
That's fine. I just wanted a ballpark idea.
Yeah.
When we look at your proposed policies on that page, the only one that has a concern for me personally is the fleet.
Mhm.
All the vehicles that I've looked at and compared a similar model to just a regular fuel efficient gas one, there's a dramatic difference in the cost.
Yeah.
And personally, I don't think we're at the stage yet to deal there. So it may be benefit us to concentrate on the other three and a little less on the vehicle one, personally.
And I was actually going to go with Councilmember Jacobus because what I was curious about is maybe it's okay to have a EV fleet policy, but give it to council to show us what that price difference is,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Because on a long-term basis, it might be more advantageous, but Councilor Jacobus's point, I mean, you're looking at probably $10,000 to $20,000 more right off the bat for an EV car right now. But it'd be good just maybe give us some options and see where we want to go forward with.
Yeah.
Councilman Moore? Or?
Oh, go ahead.
And I think along that same lines would be, I don't have an electric vehicle. I don't know the timing for charging. I don't know the efficiency, that type of stuff. If we're looking at city vehicles, where would we charge them? How long does it take if we look at going to our public safety? What does that do as far as reliability, speed? I think all those things are things that we need to consider when we look at our fleet. I'm all for trying to get the most fuel efficient. We also make sure, my view is we need to make sure that it also serves that function.
Right.
We can still, perform, whether it's fire with emergency vehicles or police. We need to make sure that we don't want to just go to something if it's not quite ready for prime time. And if it's going to be an issue of even trying to charge and have them ready to go when we have emergencies or need quick response.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Our intent right now is just focusing on administrative city hall fleet, just to your point for fire and PD. And then the way that the verbiage is written, it includes EV, hybrid, and alternative fuel vehicles. So hybrid is a combination of both, which is usually a little bit cheaper and still has the option for gas. So it's not strictly relying on like a charger here at City Hall.
Like self-charging as you
Right.
drive them.
Right.
Great.
So I have a comment. So there's a lot of trickery, as you probably know, out there right now on sort of the green and the electric vehicles and everything else because of what's really charging the batteries. So this whole concept of working towards green by changing to EVs and things like that is it's not a neutral situation. The impact is still substantial on the environment. So I like these things in principle, but I don't trust them because, just read the Wall Street Journal every day and it's like it blows your mind of all the trickery. But what I would say is it's sort of in the right direction, but achieving somebody else's goal of what it should be, there's an agenda. And I might not agree with that agenda, but I'm not saying that other people wouldn't. I'm just saying that to the point of cost effective and conservation, you can't go wrong. The more we just conserve, and that leads me to my second point, which is talk about a green community. At the same time, you drive around Milton and there's so many uplights on landscaping that it just blows you. Have y'all noticed that? We are far from a green-minded community. People are chopping down the understory growth that's, and you have a tree over here and a tree over there and these massive lights. So I think we probably need to preach a gentle conservation to get everybody to do their part, and then we would truly be more in the green sphere than trying to achieve metrics as somebody else checks us off out of control. And I'd love to speak with you about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Cool. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Emily.
All right, well, City Clerk, please stay on agenda item B.
Mayor, that next item is the fiscal year 2024 budget preparation and discussion of Milton's capital improvement plan. Our Assistant City Manager, Ms. Bernadette Harville.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight is the fourth meeting in our budget preparation series. I have some exciting news. If we get the feedback we are looking for this evening, we can hopefully cancel next Monday's meeting in this series and kind of take a break and then regroup in June to start going over the operating forecasts. So that's exciting news. And so again, here we are tonight. We have for you a draft of the 7-year plan, as well as a few key areas we need some feedback on. And then again, we'll be back in June to start discussing that 5-year operating forecast, as well as talk about preparing a draft budget and consideration for voting on the millage rate adoption. We'll having that budget workshop, and then following that up with our public hearings and our final adoption for the budget for fiscal year 2024. I know this slide has a lot of information on it, but I just want to focus on a few key items. We wanted to show you where the changes from last year's plan have been made. Each fiscal year has been broken down into 2 columns, the first of which is the amount identified in last year's capital improvement plan document. And the second column with the brown header represents any changes in the current request made by staff input, the committee feedback, as well as council feedback we've received to date. Any figure in green represents a decreased request from last year's plan. Anything in that peach color represents an increased request from last year's plan. And anything without a highlighted figure has remained the same as last year. For fiscal year 2024, with all the changes before you, we are currently dollar for dollar in the same place as last year's request of $5,843,081, as we have allocated any net savings towards the planning of an indoor community center, which we'll be discussing later this evening. In the 5-year operating forecast, we've also set aside funding to cover any potential new initiatives, so we're in a great place to be able to make some other considerations as we move forward with our process. I think this is a more digestible view. This is what we are going to be looking at this evening. This is the zoomed-in version of the pay-as-you-go projects that we'll be going over. First, we will discuss the pricing increases that are impacting the fire apparatus and vehicle replacement account and the pavement management account. We'll also be going over the details of a potential indoor community center identified in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And staff is also seeking guidance on one non-PAYGO project that qualifies for T-SPLOS funding, which is the Southeast CRABAPPLE Connector project. We'll start there tonight. So the Southeast CRABAPPLE Connector project is the potential creation of a new local road, along with intersection improvements that will connect Broadwell Road to Charlotte Drive. There appears to be a few ways to manage this connection, and some of the proposed work is associated with the Mayfield District project, and that will have an impact on this entire area. Tonight, staff is seeking feedback on whether this project is a project council would like to see us proceed with simultaneous to the Mayfield District project, maybe wait until Mayfield District is done to see what impact that has, or if you have any feedback that we should be removing this project based on the Mayfield District project. So I'll just take a moment, step back, and I have Sarah leaders here if you have any questions specific that she can go over to give you any more feedback.
Just a quick question. When we brought this up, I don't know if it was a year ago, it first came up, we had some community input with concerns about how it would affect properties, and they were questioning or at least bringing up concerns about how is this really going to affect their property in that area versus what are the true benefits. Have we heard anything more from that, or is that what you're trying to find out from us, what our thoughts are?
I was trying to gain council's feedback based on some of that feedback we've heard in the past and based on kind of the new avenue that we have. Mayfield District wasn't even really a consideration at all when this originally was proposed and all those concerns were brought about. Does Mayfield District change your mind about needing this connection, or are we still seeking this potentially, or do we need to wait until we kind of see how Mayfield District plays out to even consider this?
Kind of give us what's the benefit, what's the need to do this, to add this road versus continue to see what we're going to come up with the Mayfield District.
Sure. The idea with the Southeast Connector was, first of all, the intersection of Mayfield, Birmingham, the left turns, you can't turn left from Mayfield to head south on Broadwell. So looking for alternate ways to get from Mayfield over to Broadwell, as well as Charlotte, both from a vehicular as well as the pedestrian connectivity. And the map that's shown here is that very southern proposed concept that we funded with the PAYGO a couple of years ago, I think last year, to look at as these developments happen, how could a road possibly connect? And the developments are building a portion of the road, but not making the connection yet. So that would be one possible scope for the Southeast Crabapple Connector. The Mayfield District could also provide that same maneuver to get, again, from Mayfield or from Charlotte over to Broadwell. So there's, just a couple things that could be looked at with this. This was just one of the concepts that came out of the early study. And because this project was in the CIP, felt now was the time to revisit it. We could also defer it and look at it in more detail with the transportation plan before any decisions are made on how to proceed with funding. But again, we brought it up because it was in the 7-year CIP as of last year's budget.
But when it was put in, we weren't, with the Mayfield district really wasn't being thought of, correct?
Correct, yes.
Based on that, I would see us to defer it, wait until we see what happens with Mayfield, see what the layout actually ends up being, and then come back and review this and decide whether to go forward or not.
And Sarah, are you, because I go around this area quite a bit, and this really isn't a choke point with traffic right now, is it? Mrs.
It's not, no.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
not as critical as the north, east, and west were.
Okay. Is council okay with just punting this in the future? All right,
Perfect. We
That was
appreciate
easy.
that. We just
There
didn't
we
want to
go.
leave an unfunded item sitting in the CIP.
great.
All right, our next project we'd like to discuss is the PAYGO funding that supports fire's ability to buy and replace apparatus and administrative vehicles for the department. Costs associated with replacing fire apparatus has increased substantially, as has the delivery time from order to actually putting the truck in service. Both inflation and new EPA requirements are impacting apparatus pricing. We have seen the quints go up $300,000, nearing $1.6 million each since this time last year. A quint, again, has the pump, the water tank, the fire hose, the aerial device, and the ground ladders. The pumpers we have are approximately $240,000 more at a minimum of $800,000 each since our last order in 2019, and we're seeing some of them coming in at quotes of $1 million. So as for the timeline, we're being told that a 2-year build-out due to back orders is most likely scenario. We've even heard reports of some jurisdictions being told 3 years is more likely. Currently, we are on schedule for a 2-year time frame, depending on when we order. We are working with our auditors to verify ARPA eligibility under the response to the public health emergency category. But if it is allowed, staff recommends assigning the remaining $1.2 million in ARPA funds to the purchase of a new apparatus for Fire Station 45. Back in fiscal year 2021, council authorized the transfer of $1,350,000 in PAYGO funds to maintain the reduced annual PAYGO allocation, as well and allowed for the purchase of a new ladder truck and an admin vehicle. The traditional PAYGO annual request prior to the allocation of those funds was around $450,000 to $515,000 annually. We were able to reduce that down to $377,500 in fiscal year 22 and $227,500 in fiscal year 23. You can see along the bar at the bottom, we had anticipated that $227,500 figure going through 2029, but due to the pricing increases that we're seeing and the accelerated timeline we need to order things in, we just can't foresee that staying as such. The request from fire department is if we just had to fund everything through a PAYGO program of increasing that to $560,000 annually, putting us in a place to be able to buy those trucks with cash on hand. If we were able to utilize the ARPA funding, we would be able to reduce that down to about $350,000 annually through about 2030, 2032 before we look at this again. But eventually it will need to go back up to that more traditional $500,000 annually to fund the replacement of all these vehicles in a timely manner. So that is staff's recommendation. We just wanted to check if council was supportive of the idea of utilizing the remaining ARPA funding, assigning that to this if it's authorized by the auditors, and kind of just tying that up and being done with our ARPA funding at this time.
All right, questions?
I guess I'd like to know exactly what our need is for quints or pumpers. Exactly, when do we have to have this one? When are we looking at, we need this, versus just saying, please approve $560,000. So what's the game plan going forward for vehicle replacement? I was under the impression a little bit that Station 45 was going to we could build Station 45 and have equipment to support that. Is that not the case?
So we do have a reserve vehicle. I have Chief Musa here too, but I will just give you the key highlights. So currently, Chief Musa, Matt Marriott, and I have looked at this and have built out a plan for about every 10 years to replace the larger apparatus, which would require now the advanced time to place the orders to have them built out in time to receive them in that time frame. So that is what this is built on, but we can definitely pause this and come back and show you next week the actual build out if needed, but that's the anticipated timeline is about 10 years for the larger vehicles. And I believe it was about 6 or 7 years for the admin vehicles. And we have a whole list of every vehicle that we have and when it would need to be replaced. And then second question was the Fire Station 45. There is a reserve vehicle that can be used. Again, because of the 2 to 3 year time frame, that truck would be used in that time frame while we were placing the order. If we were going to use the ARPA funds, we would receive it by December 2026 to be able to utilize this funding. If we were choosing not to, we can use that for another project and then just use the vehicle on hand and defer further the purchase of that new truck. So if you'd like, I can invite Chief Bemos up here to answer that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the one question was deferring further, as you can see. I mean, I wish we would have ordered like 10 of these trucks in 2019.
I mean, that's why we built out a plan, because by the time we need to replace the current engines that are servicing the station, they'll be about 15 years. So we're pushing as far as we can. The EPA is changing the requirements for emissions for the diesel engines. So going to a bigger block, less emissions, there's an increase there. So what we're trying to do, just to give you an example, we're trying to save money. Us, the North Fulton Chiefs, we got together and we're leveraging our buying power against Pierce to say, if you want us to buy your trucks, we need some discounts. So with the prepay and the discount for North Fulton Chief buying power, it's almost $90,000 savings if we decide to order an engine. So we're approaching this as the 5 cities. So no longer I'm going negotiating Sandy Springs. So we approached this. We talked to Pierce and said, we want to leverage this because we're buying trucks from you. The issue that we run into, we can look at cheaper engines. The problem is they're not all have service here. So there's only 2 manufacturers that have service centers here, Pierce and E1. There are cheaper engines out there, but they don't have service here. So what that means, if one of the engines goes down, we have to wait. So they're going to send a mechanic somewhere, or they might send us to Florida. That's the problem. Pierce is probably the best in the business. They're reliable trucks. They last. That's why we were hoping to stay with Pierce. But at your direction, we're happy to look at other ones. It's all going to be within that price. What we try to do also is all our engines are the same, so we don't have to train firefighters in multiple types of apparatus.
Right.
And we move, because we're small, we move people all the time, so they're able to function because it's the same engine. The other thing, too, parts. I use the Southwest business model. They went with the same plane, same parts. The mechanics are trained, the pilots in the same thing. So it just keeps it consistent in the sense. But these costs are increasing. I mean, year over year, they're increasing. It's just inflation, unfortunately. That's why we had to adjust our plan. But we do have a plan. I think we have a 10-year plan, actually. So they're not slated to be replaced till 10 years from now. So we just wanted to make sure, build up, that when the day comes, we have the money for pay as you go.
Do you have to pay when you order, or do you pay when delivered?
If we prepay, we get a discount if we prepay. So that's like a $30,000, $35,000, I think, discount, plus the $60,000 discount from the fire chiefs. It adds up to about $90,000. We can save $90,000 if we ordered it. But we're looking at 2 to 3 years before we get one. To go back to your question, we do have a reserve apparatus that we could use. That reserve apparatus, the Quint, which for our ISO is probably the best tool. It's 15 years old, so we've taken care of it, the maintenance, so we can do that while we can wait. If that's your direction, that's okay. We have a ladder that does not have a pump. It's just a straight ladder. There's other options that we can run, like a task force in the sense, so they can run an engine for all fire calls, and then if they're second going somewhere else, they can jump on the ladder. So we just have to make sure we equip the firefighters with all the equipment they need so that truck is ready to go. So there's several models that we can do if that's so that's kind of in a nutshell what's going on. These manufacturers are just, the engines, it used to be 600. Now it's pushing close to 1 million. Ladders are going to be closing into 2 million. To go back to electrical There's electrical engines there. Supposedly they save you on diesel, but it's a disaster. They're almost $2.5 million for some cities are doing that, but just the infrastructure alone. So we looked at all the options to see. It's impossible. So
How many can we buy and then sell to surrounding communities when we have an inventory?
but we sold
we can have an
like we sold
inventory.
one of the engines.
Yeah.
We sold one of the engines. Yeah. So the goal is when we get that quint, we will sell one of our quints. The quints are desirable because they can do both. So we can sell that 15-year-old quint, or even the latter that we have, the E1 without. We could probably, don't hold me to this, we can probably get $60,000 for it, 70,000. We got the engine that we sold, we got 41,000. And it was from 2007, one of the originals. So the goal in 10 years is that these current engines will become our reserves. But yes, that's sort of what we've got going. But we have a plan built out. We worked on it that specifically tells which dates and when we should be purchasing those.
I like what Paul said. Let's become a dealer. We can make money on this.
It's insane.
We need to become a
Yeah.
It's
manufacturer.
insane.
But, and that
Yeah,
first
no
Quint was
kidding.
the one we bought in 2007?
Yes, the original.
Way back when?
Yes.
Okay.
So we changed we rebuilt the engine on that. We rebuilt the transmission. But at some point, it's going to become a money pit, in my
Right.
opinion. So
Right.
we will have to.
I'm just amazed at, I know inflation is up there, but we're increasing our budget 146% over what we were planning on. It's just, now I know that doesn't take into account if we use the ARPA funding.
Well, we always knew at some point we would have to return to the more traditional $400,000 to $500,000
Right.
annually. I looked back and I think it was FY 16, 17, 18, all of those years had around 415 to
did.
550, like $50,000.
Okay.
So this would be just a sooner return to
Okay.
that traditional funding style than we had anticipated and hoped for when you gave us the last opportunity to put in the cash money to buy the truck up front.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this? Is everybody okay with using the ARPA for this truck?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will bring feedback once we get that final approval from the auditors. Okay, so similar to the prices for the apparatus, inflation has also impacted paving costs, including materials as well as labor. Sarah's team has reviewed their paving plan based on feedback received from the most recent survey conducted by our vendor, Infrastructure Management Services, or IMS. They've taken into consideration the best approach to maintaining our minimum PCI, which is our pavement condition index of 70, including allocation of T-SPLOST funding where able to help offset any inflationary increases, as well as addressing the replacement of local funding in some areas. Staff has determined that full depth reclamation, where the entire road is taken down to the base and rebuilt as opposed to patching and repairing segments, is still the best cost benefit in certain circumstances, including roadways considered in a failure state, as well as those requiring shoulder widening. Prices for full depth reclamation services, as well as all the other treatment options, have increased. For staff to carry out the current 5-year plan, an additional $300,000 in PAYGO funding is being requested annually for FY 24 through 27, as you can see indicated by the peach figures at the top. Again, the later years will be reassessed as the end of the 5-year plan comes about and they create a new 5-year plan. So we're leaving 28 and 29, and 30 will have an additional $2.7 million, and we'll assess that as we get closer to the end of that plan. So just looking for a little bit of feedback from council, if they support the idea of increasing $300,000 for those 4 years to allow Sarah's team to continue with the current plan, or if you'd like us to revisit that plan and look at some alternative options.
All right, questions?
So are we experiencing any, have the weather conditions or any other increased traffic because of population growth, are we incurring a larger or faster degradation to our roads these days
That sounds like
than
a Sarah
we would have
question.
experienced in the past?
Based on our latest IMS data, which they actually did our first assessment in 2007, and our deterioration rates are higher than they were back in 07. So that was a good apples to apple comparison with the same company performing that analysis. And then this one they did this year, and then they did one about 4 years ago as well.
So how does this, I know that we've got some discussion of trails and being cycling friendly and then degradation, et cetera. Are there other parts of the budget that will address some of those things that we're trying to do, or is that also included in this budget?
Part of it is in the pavement management as far as the shoulder widening for some of those cyclist improvements. And that comes into play and is applicable when the road is in need of full depth reconstruction. There are also some bike safety initiatives that could be funded through another source of money, but this tries to look at roads that need the full depth and are on the cycling priority roadways.
Thank you.
When we do full reconstruction, which it sounds like that's the best way when the road really needs to be repaved, take it down, start it right from the base up. Do we get some type of warranty period from those manufacturers, people that actually do the work? What's our recourse if we start to see that breaking down, after 6 months or whatever? Is there a warranty that they provide to us?
2 years for the standard, the surface
So if
material.
we start seeing cracks or potholes or breaking off on the side, that type of thing, we've got up to 2 years to actually address and get them to fix it.
Right, that's in the maintenance bond with the
Thank you.
contract.
Once we do a full depth reclamation, do we expect 10 years out of that road or more or less?
More 25.
25 years?
That's the hope. Of course, volumes can accelerate that as well as truck traffic. Trucks have more of an impact on the pavement exponentially more.
Any other thing? Any other questions? No? I think we're all good on that. Thank you.
Just wanted to, even with this increase, we have had some offsets that will make this neutral. So originally there was about $600,000 that we thought was needed for the Big Creek Greenway, which now can be covered by T-Splost. We have the $300,000 annually for the next 3 years that was going to go towards bridges, which will now be covered by T-Splost. So a couple things there that we have saved in order if this is approved to cover this.
Perfect.
Okay. On to our final discussion point for this evening and for this CIP series. We have our indoor community center. The 2027 Comprehensive Parks and Recreation Master Plan calls for a 76,442 square foot multi-generational indoor recreation center by 2027. Based on our current partnerships, Parks and Recreation is recommending a 35,000 to 40,000 square foot indoor community center that will include needed basketball courts and host exercise classes, summer camps, art classes, dance classes, and more. Programming will be for all ages, from youth to active seniors, which will address the multi-generational focus outlined in the master plan and address active seniors, which is we are lacking in programming at this time for them. Park staff estimates the cost at $13 million, and there's currently no funding associated with this project aside from the $406,166 staff is recommending being set aside for planning and design based on available funding after the CIP updates we showed earlier on that bigger grid with all the projects. Park staff had estimated that annual operating costs will be approximately $500,000, which with 48% going towards personnel and 52% towards building maintenance costs. Staff use City Hall, which is a similarly sized building at 33,500 square feet, to estimate costs. And we're anticipating some revenue from the rental of the courts and the rooms in the building, as well as reduced IGA costs, increased commissions from basketball, and commissions from the other classes mentioned earlier at around $50,000, and some anticipated revenues to offset some of that $500,000. The feedback staff is seeking tonight is when council would like to see this facility open and and what type of funding we should use to finance that. So here we have, with any project, we always weigh the pros and cons of each funding approach. As you know, pay-as-you-go or pay-go funding is Milton's traditional funding approach and has earned us our AAA bond rating when we had no credit history. The disadvantage of this approach is the time it will take to save up the $13 million. Just need to take that into consideration. Debt financing ensures the project can be delivered sooner and spreads the costs of the useful life of the asset to those who are using it would pay for it, but it incurs additional costs as part of the interest payments. So we all kind of understand that concept, just have that there for you as we make those considerations. Also wanted to provide some of the current information of our debt so you have that information in the back of your mind. The only debt that is applicable to our debt limits is general obligation bond debt, but we also do need to consider the total payments we're making for both bonds, as that is the money we have to set aside. We currently pay approximately $3.4 million in debt payments for both bonds annually. Staff recommends setting aside any potential funding for the next year to assess a strategy for PAYGO funding option. But again, if council would like to see this sooner, we just need some direction on looking into any debt financing so we can get that moving if that's what you'd like to see.
So quick question, Bernadette. So the PAYGO option, when would it be built?
So that's kind of what we're looking at. We would really have to look at this strategy when the millage rate and the digest comes in to be able to assess where we are with our anticipated largest tax source, to be able to assess that better. And we can kind of hold this decision off for that time. Historically, we have been able to put away the money that we've saved from revenues coming in over anticipated and conservative spending models, and we've been able to build Fire Station 45. We've been able to fund the remainder of some other projects, but we did have that ARPA funding that helped us. So we would have to take pen to paper to look at what we would be able to get $13 million.
When will we get the tax digest, Bernadette? I know sometimes we're dependent on Fulton County to actually give that to us.
Typically around end of June, early July is when we receive that. And like I said, we don't have to have just some good guidance on if there was no way we wanted to wait at all, we would have to consider immediately starting the debt process. If we have some time to make those considerations and that's a feedback, we can put pen to paper as we get those numbers in and kind of show you what that would look like in an aggressive savings model towards this project. We can also talk about, again, we have, I'll go back for a moment to this amazing grid and show you that we do have some considerations. We talked about some of the items in Providence Park and Milton City Park and Preserve being 4 to 8 year items. We can talk about extending that a little further if need be in order to fund something like this. So we have some different opportunities there to be able to set aside funding. So just want to keep that into consideration as we look at this as a whole now.
Yeah, I'll say I like your idea of just waiting a few months, I guess, until we get the tax digest and seeing what the cost is. If we want to go ahead and do it now or use debt and see what the debt, I mean, obviously interest rates are pretty high right now, so I probably would not be.
Yeah, I'm pretty conservative.
Yeah, I'd rather not
I don't
I
know
would prefer
about
not
that.
to do that. And I know there's a need in the community for an indoor community center. I just don't know what priority council wants to put that
But
on, so.
there's a need, but we're filling that need currently without too much hassle,
That was my
correct?
question.
Or,
How are we?
and we also have a time frame of what, 2 years before we could actually put a shovel in the ground there? Or is that because of the owners, the house?
At that particular property, potentially, yes. Not 2 years, no. We got about 18 months left, maybe. Not
Year and a half.
Yeah. We are surviving with our programming. Specifically, it's basketball, but we're leaning heavily on Fulton County schools, and it can be challenging getting kicked out last minute and trying to reallocate teams to different locations. And, ultimately it's a reflection on our programming. So having access to our own gyms would alleviate that issue. Then we could open up new programming as well. Volleyball, you could do indoor pickleball and everything else that was mentioned earlier with dance and art and everything else.
Personally, I'd like to see us do a pay-as-you-go. I'm just concerned about taking on additional debt, losing our bond ratings, and just, I think most citizens would understand that we're going to move forward, but we're going to just do it at a pace where we can pay as we go.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
Bernadette, could you maybe give us, well, I guess your option was, if we do the pay-as-you-go, as I think council maybe is okay with that? Of course, you might come back with us, and say, well, it's going to be 20 years, and we might be like, all right, maybe we'll do something. But maybe come back before us and show us what a accelerated pay-as-you-go program, if things run smoothly, when we could get it built.
Absolutely. That's the exact guidance we needed to be able to do that. So we can look at how we can
Well,
work
for
our
me-
CIP.
Well, wait, I would just add, it also depends on whether you're building from scratch or if you find something to renovate, or, I understand the need. It would just be nice. We don't have a specific plan, I don't think. And we have a property, but who knows if that property will be that,
Yeah, all of those things are still an open option. So
Yeah.
we have some time, I think, to be
Yeah.
able to look at this.
yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. So that's it. Just to let you know kind of where we're going. Again, next steps, we'll come back with that operating plan. And as part of that, we'll bring in this consideration. Then we'll be going over the millage rate hearings and having the adoption. So thank you so much for all the feedback during this series, and we have next week off.
Great.
For that item.
Yeah, sorry, for the discussion of the CIP.
All right. Do we have an executive session, Steve? No? No executive session. We will adjourn the meeting. Okay? Great. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Rick.